Okay, so inside of FormIt, we've got some basic content being built, which is all good, but now we need to go through some basics of actually creating output for those visuals to get things in front of clients or your professor, or in our case for 222, getting those things posted online beyond just using the print screen function. So first thing that we want to do is actually look at sun and shadows. Those are going to create a sense of depth and anchor things to the ground. So that tool set is the sun, right up here. Same thing for the online version, pretty much in the same location. And two things that we can do in this. First, I can come here and establish my overall location. So it might be nice to do that first. That way your sun is going to be set correctly based on the latitude and longitude of your project. So you might look at that first as step one. And that's we've covered that. That is simply locating your project on a map. Right. So the next thing to do is to come to the sun and turn on shadows. Okay, once those are on, I have a couple of options. I've got the date that I can navigate through and the time. So this is going to accurately move the sun through its arc across the sky relative to the location of your project, and give you the opportunity to set up an understanding of where shadows are going to fall. When building visualizations, it is often important to place those in a direction favorable to representing the design, right? So I'm not only looking at how the building is going to cast shadows with I'm trying to protect a facade from direct sunlight, but I'm also looking at what is going to build a good image in terms of my final output. So for right now, in terms of simply building imagery, that's kind of what I'm interested in, right? So I'm going to get the shadows falling away from the camera in this particular case. Next, I'm going to turn that off, and let's go to the visibility settings right over here. So to do this, I'm going to zoom in just a little bit closer so you can see with a little more drama what's going to happen with this tool set. Oh, and keep in mind, if your computer is slower, you might need to run with shadows off. It does take a little bit of computing power to constantly calculate those shadows. So if you notice things slowing down when shadows are on, turn them off while you're working, turn them back on when you're doing your visualizations. Okay, so shadows on. Ambient shadows is another kind of thing here, and you can kind of see what that's doing. It's creating a little bit of a graying out effect in terms of building not just a direct harsh shadow, but calculating ambient light. Typically, I'm going to turn that off. I'm not trying to create realism with FormIt. I'm really trying to create these really nice schematic kind of views. We will get into some of the section cut effects later as we're starting to generate orthographic views out of FormIt. For right now, we're going to ignore that set. Although one thing that I will point out, this monotone surfaces is really quite nice in terms of looking at an early design schematic where I might not be ready to talk about materials yet. But for now, we're good with leaving that on, okay? So next tab over is edges. Thick edges are a must. I mean, again, it's a subtle change that we can see right here, but it's a really nice change. And I can increase the contrast on that if I want to push it even further. But it's a really nice thing to turn those on. 80% seems about nice. Sketchy edges are going to loosen things up a little bit in terms of how things are drawn. Extended edges create that sort of extension. Kind of cool, a little less interested in that. And sketchy lines, I'm okay with things looking sort of nice and crisp, but I do definitely want to see that increased contrast, especially when you look here and having those wide lines or thick edges turned on. That's also, you're going to see that in silhouettes. That's going to help. Increasing that all the way up, well, about 70%, again, seems to work well. That's going to be relevant a bit to the scale that you're working at in FormIt, okay? So it's something you're always paying attention to, always adjusting that slider just a little bit. Next, on the environment, we do have a few things that are going to help with this. The defaults really are quite nice for this. The background in terms of the sky is really nice. It's going to let the building pop off. The ground plane, very important because that's going to catch shadows for you and anchor things to the ground until you have replaced that with actual geometry on the ground plane. I would definitely suggest leaving that on. Fog is going to help create a sense of depth, so I would leave that on. So yeah, that's pretty much all good right there. Okay, so that just a couple of quick things are going to allow us to establish a little bit better visual fidelity. So let's look at saving those and saving particular camera views next, which is going to be right here in the Scenes tool. So with the Scenes tool selected, I can click the plus sign. Always name these views. You don't want scene 1 through 87. So give these a quick descriptive view. So this would be view, I'm just going to call it all, right? I'm going to hit the refresh button out of habit, not necessity here. But if you notice, this is including these elements: the camera, the layers, the sun and shadows, the visual styles, visual environment, all included in the animation that we're getting ready to build here. Okay, every time I hit refresh, it is saving all of that data. Okay, what that means is if I move if I move my camera essentially to a different location, so let's move this to sort of a bird's eye view. I'm going to click plus. We'll call this one bird. I'm going to click refresh to save that. It is saving all of that data, the sun, everything. So for instance, if I were to go to the sun and give it a slightly different time of day and click refresh, it is going to remember that for this view as in bird. Okay, so if I double click view all, notice it's repositioned the sun. If I double click bird, it's going to move that and relocate the sun. So let's do one more. Add in a new scene. Let's zoom in really close and try and set sort of a nice experiential kind of view, something like that. And we'll name this one. That's exactly how I didn't want to do that. I shouldn't have double clicked there. Move that back down. There we go. That scene, I need to hit the refresh button. I'm going to rename that one. Oh, come on. There we go. Glass. So now I have 3 views. View all, bird's eye view, glass. Cool. All those are saved. Double clicking will navigate through each one. I can also hit the play button, and the play button is going to animate from point to point. And if you remember when we had this up, if I select any one of these views, hit the stop button here, you can see include an animation means it is going to string through each one of those. So if I turn off include an animation, essentially when I hit the play button, it's going to skip that particular view. I have a pause time and a transition time. So essentially it is taking 2 seconds from the camera to move from view to bird to glass. So 2 seconds to bird, 2 seconds to glass. If I need to slow that down, I would just increase the transition time to maybe 4 seconds. Or if I don't want the camera to stop at each one, I can just change that to 0. To export these, so if I'm going to go to, let's say, the glass view. To get this out of the computer at a slightly higher resolution, I would come File, Export Locally. I'm going to scroll down and select As Image. I am perfectly fine with the viewport resolution since we're sending this to the internet, but there are several options that I have here, but viewport perfectly fine for the resolution that I want to do. Again, sort of a web-ready resolution. At this point, I can just click Export. This is going to give me a location to save. Typically, we're going to go with a JPEG file. Just name this Glass View. And save, and that file is now ready to upload to the internet.